Chapter 168 to 170. Where to start? Yuriko gazed at her hands while looking a bit lost. What about starting on how did you actually get yourself into the position of a prisoner? Rei quipped, trying to help Yuriko find some good point to start her life story, while also making it easier for her to start talking now that she had certain guidelines and something different than her past torturous years to focus her attention on. Right. Anger flashed through Yuriko's eyes as she remembered what happened to her, but this anger quickly disappeared as she bit her lower lip before forcing her body to completely relax. Her eyes gained a determined glint, knowing she had to get it off her chest if she was to come to terms with those feelings. Taking a deep breath, Yuriko slowly started. I was a part of the now almost extinct Yukimi clan, the founders of KasiCair. It was actually my grandfather who founded the village, Yuriko said a bit self-mockingly, while her voice shook at the memory of her childhood. The second Tsunade heard her. She halted for a moment and her attention almost doubled. She could not believe how similar the circumstances between them were. Looking again at the woman with slumped shoulders, who was projecting a dejected aura all around herself, Tsunade could only wryly smile. She briefly wondered if she also became such a sorry sight if she didn't meet Rei. Since young, I lived in luxury, and the only thing expected from me was to better my ninja arts. Especially my bloodline, which seemed to be extraordinarily strong. Grandfather often used to say that according to the records of our clan, I am the first in 2 centuries to have such strong blood, Yuriko said in a sad, nostalgic tone, not even knowing how many memories this evoked in Tsunade. When Rei naturally noticed it, but he could only gently put his hand around Tsunade's shoulder and cuddle her closer to himself in order to give her a bit of consolation. Things like cooking, cleaning, and so on were not important. All I had to do was focus on developing my bloodline jutsu, the snow release, which is capable of absorbing the chakra of the enemy and replenishing our chakra with it, among other things. And I guess you got curious how it works on a deeper level. That's how you learned elemental sage mode, isn't it? Rei nodded. It was a possibility. After all, Hashirama's situation was not much different. If the bloodline was capable of transferring the chakra of one person and remaking it to fit another before replenishing his reserves, there simply had to be nature energy involved in that. Tsunade's research showed that there are many bloodlines that unknowingly use nature energy in their jutsu without even the caster noticing. For example, the Kagaya clan. Their body is very sturdy, and that is because of natural reserves of nature energy it takes in. These reserves are very small, and it can't really be called sage mode, as there is no mixing with chakra involved. But instead, these reserves are needed for the body manipulation, with which the Kagaya clan members make holes for their bones to stick out from their bodies, and then seal them shut. If somebody attempted to coat their underskin with bone armor as Kagaya could, it would be a very painful experience to live with. It is only thanks to these natural reserves of nature energy that the members of the Kagaya clan do not scream in pain every time they use their bloodline and are able to use it so efficiently. Honestly, Rei had to admit that chakra was a wondrous, but also a very unknown thing in this era. No Uchiha would tell you they use and need mostly in chakra for their Sharingan. Why? Because they do not know about it. They never bothered to study it that deeply. As a ninja clan, they are focusing on the development of jutsu and do not try to understand how exactly it works. Their explanation is, it's our bloodline, duh. And that's it. Tsunade spent a lot of time working this out with the pair of Sharingan eyes Rei bought on the black market for a literal fortune. With the third war being barely over, one would not believe the things that he could get in the black market. Anyway, it was proof that there is more to the bloodlines than it appears at the first glance. Some bloodlines, such as Karama, Hyuga, not to even mention Akimichi giant shift bullshit, simply have to work with something stronger than the chakra of an individual. There is simply no way for a singular Akimichi to have enough chakra to be enlarged by a factor of 100, no matter how fat he is. Yes, after prodding and probing, I learned to manipulate the non-chakra energy in the air, nature energy, as you called it. Yuriko gave Rei a meaningful look. For her and her clan, this energy was something new. As for sages, she never heard of them. But back to the topic. The atmosphere in the room suddenly grew downtrodden as Yuriko slumped her shoulders even more before continuing. Since I was busy learning the ninja arts, I had no time to do menial tasks. I was given an attendant, a slave if you will. The air around Yuriko grew heavy as her killing intent involuntarily poured out of her, earning her a few raised eyebrows. Even Maki, the newest member of the group, had already experienced far heavier killing intent from Yujito, or Mei, when they spared, so this was frankly nothing but amusing. Nevertheless, they quickly understood this attendant will play a crucial role in this story. Yuriko gritted her teeth before she barely restrained her anger to get the next sentence out of her. His name, Makoto Suzufumi. Oh boy, I think I know where this is going. The corner of Rei's lips twitched. Ma, you will be delighted to know he died by being literally backstabbed by his right-hand man, and had enough time to realize what happened to suffer through the betrayal. Not the most painful of deaths, but a very pathetic and enraging one indeed. That remark created a small, satisfied smile on Yuriko's lips, but her face still showed a slight discontent at being unable to kill the man herself. I was good to him, you know? Yuriko started in a low tone. I never treated him like a slave. There were other slaves, but he had so much freedom, and his life was simply better because of me. I even allowed him to practice ninjutsu from scrolls belonging to my clan. And then, 12 years ago, when our clan was not in the best shape because of the Second Ninja War, I turned my back on him after a long and exhausting fight, and with a slight dull ache on the back of my head, the world suddenly grew dark. Yuriko's eyes showed exactly how helpless and bewildered she felt at this betrayal. It was almost poetic. The man who stabbed her in her back died by being stabbed in the back by a man he trusted. Ray only barely held himself from chuckling, mostly to not seem like laughing at the distraught woman. Mei, Ringo, and Tsunade didn't have such a problem. They all chuckled, grinned, and snorted respectively, which earned them a disapproving glare from Konan and Pakura. After that, I found myself in the underground cell we used as a prison for important people. Now, I was a prisoner in the village belonging to our clan, and I had no idea how or why. Yuriko sighed, but Mikado came a few hours after I woke up to gloat. He actually managed to pull off a revolt. The slaves of our clan apparently didn't like that in times when people of the Land of Snow mostly starved and froze to death on a daily basis. They had a safe place, a warm bed, enough food for a minimal amount of work. Our clan, or at least most of it, never mistreated their servants as it was counterproductive, but maybe that was a mistake, Yuriko quietly said, looking conflicted and confused. It was obvious she had no idea why exactly did their servants betray them. Mikado said the reason why many of the Yukimi clan died during the Second War was the drugs our servants were putting into our food. Yuriko lowered her head to hide the tears that started streaming down her cheeks with her hair before she wiped them away. Most of my family died in the war. The clan was so weakened that Mikado, who was one of the most skilled people in the ninjutsu in the village, after the heavy losses the Yukimi clan incurred, was capable of killing almost everyone who could give him at least a bit of resistance. He killed them in their sleep. I should not have let him get stronger, Yuriko lamented, growing silent for a moment as her gaze grew distant. See, that's why you have to use seals to put safeguards on people. Ray burst out, nodding in agreement to himself, highly satisfied at being proven right. Only after getting a few disapproving looks from his girls did he add in a small voice. I mean, if you want to enslave somebody, you gotta make it foolproof, no? Not that I would ever put such a failsafe on you. Ray didn't realize his girls silently agreed with him and only glared at him because of how inappropriate that remark was at the moment. Yuriko, whose mood slightly improved watching Ray getting glared at for his remark, decided to continue. On one hand, she was on the verge of breaking down. On the other, she knew it was important to not bottle it up. It was hell for any captured member of my clan, especially women and children. Mikado especially liked me watching how he and his subordinates torture my clansmen in various ways, while showing me how superior he apparently is to me. Yuriko shuddered. Her thighs clamped together, and her arms hugged her body as she tried to make herself seem small. The first 5 years, it was pure torture, and I was the last of my clan alive, living only to satisfy Mikado's vanity. It was only later he thought about creating chakra armor after a lot of experiments. Yuriko was now openly sobbing in between the words, and Tsunade decided to cut this short. She pulled herself away from Ray and stood up before walking towards Yuriko and hugged her while whispering, "All is fine. You are no longer there," until the woman finally calmed down. Yeah. Ray slowly started when he saw Yuriko finally calm enough to listen. "I think we can wrap this up. Tsunade, would you mind showing her her room and tucking her into the bed?" Before Tsunade could react, Yuriko almost desperately asked, "What will happen to me now?" She simply had to know what to expect as surviving being a test subject once more. She would rather kill herself. "What do you mean?" Ray snorted in a ridiculing manner. "Do you think we will use you to create these cores?" "Bah, if you can do it with your bloodline, we can definitely learn it with our bloodlines or different methods. Using you is simply inefficient and insufficient. You can simply stay here until you fully recover and teach us how to do that little nifty trick of yours. After that, do whatever you want. You can leave and roam the world or join my new village. It will be up to you." Ray nonchalantly shrugged. He had no intention of holding Yuriko against her will after he learned how to create batteries working on nature energy from her. The silent seal was on her the second she stepped through the portal, so Ray was not afraid of her talking about Yuzushio or his group. After all, as Yuriko's life story proved right, safety measures were extremely important. Days passed and the whole fiasco with the failed coup, for better or worse, sent waves through the world. The minor ninja villages started, or at least tried, to be extremely friendly with their daimyo, while the said daimyo decided to be a bit more cautious of their supposed protectors. Helping a member of the royal clan to become the daimyo was fine. At the end of the day, The title would still belong to someone belonging to the said clan. But this was the first case of the open rebellion of a ninja village, where its leader tried to usurp the power for himself. And that subtly shifted the entire political situation between daimyo and ninja villages in the whole world. As for Kaioshin, they were disgruntled. Those who knew about the rebellion were flabbergasted the strongest ninjas from the villages lost, and on top of that, never came back. Those who didn't know about it, those of low rank and strength, were on the contrary bewildered the village higher-ups tried to do such a thing. But both groups had one thing in common. They both were utterly happy that the daimyo of the Land of Snow was generous enough to not give the order to execute them, or at least, the order to disband the village. Just like that, Kaioshin, while weakened beyond belief, continued to exist. In the days after the rebellion, while the ninjas of Kaioshin were too afraid to leave their village, Rei finally found a good spot to set up his village. While Kaioshin was situated in the northern part of the country, with its back tightly protected by an impassable and dangerous mountain range, Rei decided to establish his village on the other side of these mountains. The reasons for this were simple. The mountain range was the literal edge of the world. Well, not really, since Rei knew the world was not flat, but as far as the inhabitants of this world were concerned, the mountains were the end. They were so far north, nobody ever found a good reason to try and cross them. After all, the Land of Snow was the northernmost island of the elemental nations, and beyond that, nobody has a clue what is there. The mountains were also incredibly dangerous. While the Land of Snow, or as it was nowadays being renamed after Sosetsu, used the generator, the Land of Spring, changed its climate, the mountains were not included. In front of Kaioshin, the plains that were previously covered in a monumental amount of snow were now covered in colorful flowers and fresh grass, but the mountains behind the village are still covered in snow. The reason for this: the scientists simply refused to step into these mountains to set up the device needed for the generator's influence to reach there. And this worked just fine for Rei. The mountain range was very treacherous. Massive avalanches, sharp and steep cliffs with a deceptive blanket of snow on them, and their sides frozen enough for sticking exercise to not work. And if that was not enough, because of the harsh environment, the animals inhabiting the place were also a lot stronger than usual. Chakra made sure of that. While it was just a passive strengthening, and the size of the animals was only slightly bigger than normal, facing a pack of snow-dire wolves enhanced by chakra was no joke even for ninjas. These mountains were the best natural shield Rei could ever hope for. Nobody would have any valid reasons to even suspect the village is anywhere near them, even if they somehow found out it was located in the Land of Spring. After all, only a total madman would have guts to go into these mountains, much less set up an entire village there, no? That left people with only one way to accidentally reach the village without crossing the mountains: the sea. Frankly, Rei was not worried about that. In this world, adventure-seeking explorers were rare. Everybody was too busy trying to survive and get stronger or richer in this war and conflict-infested world. The closest thing to explorer was merchants who sailed on the sea to sell their goods in a different country, and even they would never get off their normal course in fear of sinking in unknown waters. Plus, this place was so far up north that nobody had any valid reason to even go here. On top of that, the Land of Snow was too big for merchants to take detours around it. The climate was freezing, the winds were slow. It would take at least half-year to sail around the island. It was simply not worth the time. And that was without taking into account the various dangerous creatures living in these waters. Yeah, Rei was fairly positive the village's location would stay hidden, unless he outright said where it was. No accidental stumbling upon it was happening anytime soon. It's beautiful, don't you think? Rei's shoulders suddenly felt added weight as Conan embraced him from behind, pressing herself to his back and leaning her chin on his right shoulder, while her arms took a tight but loving hold of his chest. Rei involuntarily smiled, enjoying the sudden warmth of his lover, as he took yet another look at the surroundings around the hill he was standing on. High snowy mountains, blue glittering sea, whitish forests. Yeah, the surrounding land was indeed a sight to behold. Yes, but the weather leaves a lot to be desired. Rei let his body shudder a bit. She distractedly hummed as she started to rub her hands on Rei's chest in an attempt to make him warmer. It will take a lot of work to make this place habitable. The corner of Conan's lips twitched upwards, tough. Rei could only helplessly groan. In a way, he brought it upon himself. The second his girls saw the climate and felt the cold, they promptly turned around while shivering and left through the portal, back into the warmth and coziness of their mansion in Yuzushio, where they stayed for the next week under warm blankets before the shiver went away. Only Conan and Tsunade stayed, and even that was to give Rei a smug yet encouraging smile that obviously meant, "I told you so." Even with the current amount of clones, it will take at least a year to cover the entire place with a huge ceiling matrix that would make the place pleasant and warm without affecting the surrounding lands. Rei half grumbled. He could not afford to spend more clones on this. His clones were already spread thin with researching new seals, building the new village up, taking care of Yuzushio development, setting up the Yuzushio Trading Company, and much more. But that's fine. I would loathe forcing my people to live here if it was not a pleasant and a good place to live in. I never realized that. Ray apologetically shook his head. He always knew he would have to spend a lot of time making this piece of inhabitable land a cozy and warm home for his village. He just didn't realize it was quite as bad as this. Ray, as somebody whose body was enhanced by nature energy on a daily basis for the last 20+ years, felt only a slight chill, but May, Ringo, and Pakura apparently almost keeled over the second they stepped through the portal. I know, Conan quietly said, enjoying the moment. It was not often she got to spend time with Ray alone. She knew Ray would give her as much alone time as she desired if only she asked for it, but that would be simply selfish, so these moments were very rare and cherished by her. I can feel it too. It is cold, but nowhere near the -40 degrees the thermometer is showing. Since you showed me how to enhance my body with nature energy, I never slacked. At least, this will show May to be a bit more diligent with the exercises she deems useless. Ray put his hand on Conan's, squeezing it slightly. A pity, really. If she did practice the exercise diligently every day, I could slave. Ahem, use her to help me out with the village, he said in a very regretful tone, causing Conan to chuckle. Yeah, a pity Tsunade has a company to direct. Otherwise, you could make cheap labor out of her too, Conan quipped. Tsunade was a senju and sage. She was somewhat resistant to cold thanks to her senju physique that started adapting to the environment straight away, but the second she activated sage mode, she felt no discomfort due to the cold whatsoever. Standing in Konoha forests and standing in this freezing land was no different for her. Speaking of which, Ray teasingly started, but Conan quickly cut him short. 222. She playfully poked his cheek with her pointing finger. I am far too busy with setting up the routes for the Yuzushio Trading Company to play builder with you, she said in a sincere tone, but her eyes gleamed with unveiled amusement at the situation. Ray could only sniff in distaste. In the end, I was abandoned. A peaceful silence spread between the two as they watched the hive of clones tirelessly work. It was only 10 minutes later. Ray decided to break the silence as he remembered. Speaking about Tsunade and May, how is that plan going along? A slight vicious light flashed through Conan's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a pleasant smile on her face. Ah, Tsunade is really invested in that. Unfortunately for her, as much as she would want it, she can't go and do the talks with Hokage. If not her appearance, manner of speech, voice, habits, her gestures could reveal her. Conan let out an annoyed sigh. So we decided it would be me who will go negotiate with Konoha. It shouldn't be hard. The air in there is currently quite explosive. Ouch! Ray chuckled, now knowing the poor saps fell for their plan. In the end, the trust between them was only so much. He shrugged and without a warning, spun on his heel while lifting the body of Conan, who yelped from surprise, and putting her on his shoulder before creating a portal to his room in his dimension. Since you will be away in Konoha for a bit, I think a few days spent together are in order. Nobody saw Ray nor Conan for the following week. What did you do? Hiruzen asked, puffing on his pipe while half glaring at Danzo, who stoically stood in front of his desk. I have no idea what you are talking about, Hiruzen, Danzo answered, his eyes showing confusion, while his expression was as if set in stone. Partially, he was telling the truth. Danzo simply did so many things that he really had no idea what exactly Hiruzen meant. How the heck did he even discover anything suspicious? Danzo thought while internally frowning. He spent the majority of his time covering the tracks, so this entire meeting was highly unusual and a very surprising thing to happen. What am I talking about? Hiruzen almost quietly asked, his rage flashing through his eyes. This was something Danzo got to see only very rarely. The expression full of anger filled with the promise of pain. Oh, he thought warily, but he really had no idea what Hiruzen meant. Yes, tell me please. He added to show some measure of respect. An enraged monkey was very hard to deal with, after all. Hiruzen's expression twisted, but he barely kept calm, just throwing a letter at Danzo, who caught it with almost practiced ease. Read. Danzo furrowed his brows at the pissed tone of his longtime friend and started reading the letter. The more he read, the more his always expressionless poker face came closer to breaking from the sheer shock he was feeling. But before Danzo could voice out any of his doubts, Hiruzen started speaking. How about explaining why Root is still in function? I remember very well that years ago, I gave the order to disband it, Danzo. Silence descended on the office as the air between Danzo and Hiruzen turned chilly, both staring at the other with unflinching determination in a powerful show of wills. What was really surprising, though, was the result. Hiruzen slightly lowered his head, not enough for it to be taken as defeat or, sage forbids, submission. Only enough to show how tired he was at having to wipe Danzo's ass. I am not angry because Root is still operating. Hiruzen wearily sighed as he started talking in an old and tired tone. That was given the second you tried to assassinate me after the death of 4th Hokage on my way to the Fire Daimyo to reintroduce myself as the new temporary Hokage. I never did that. You must be Mr. Dash, Danzo started, but Hiruzen just dismissively waved him off with his free hand, not even bothering to acknowledge the excuse. No, Danzo. What I am really angry at you for is the blatant stupidity showcased here. Hiruzen's voice started to slowly but surely get stronger. If you want to lead a freaking secret organization with no ties to Konoha, do not teach your emotionless drones to introduce themselves as roots of Konoha during their supposedly secret missions. For fuck's sake. By the end, Hiruzen was standing on his feet, clasping on his chest while breathing hard from yelling at Danzo. Danzo, however, just simply grimaced knowing the cat was out of the bag. Not because of the letter, not because the Hokage knew, but because this situation did not give any sense whatsoever for Danzo, and the old monkey was his best bet to make at least some sense out of it. Oh, he didn't want to. How he didn't want to speak with Hiruzen openly about Root. Danzo was not an idiot and knew this probably would be used by Hiruzen later down the line to majestically screw him over, but Konoha now faced a serious threat, so the cards had to be put on the table. Root didn't do it, Danzo said impassively, letting his face relax into a wide scowl. It was an open secret among the members of Hiruzen's genin team that while Danzo had an impressive poker face that simply could not be seen through, the second the man relaxed his facial muscles, his act was utterly incapable of masking what he really thought. This was a big part of the reason why Danzo always wore his grim look, which was why Hiruzen believed every word coming out of Danzo's mouth the second he saw his confused and enraged scowl. I have no memory of allowing such a mission. Danzo was the head of Root. That simply meant he was the one who handed out missions to his ninjas, and he knew one thing for sure. He did not send even one of his ninjas to the Land of Snow in decades. Hence, the report is bullshit, you want to say? Hiruzen flopped back down into his chair, not knowing what to think anymore. First, a few days ago he received a report that there was an attempt at revolt in the Land of Snow. This didn't mean much at the first glance, but since then, he always had some pretentious noble from the capital visiting, Konoha in the guise of the treaties between the village, and the daimyo slightly changing in the favor of the daimyo. Honestly, Hiruzen was too old and tired to care about these small things. Who cared if ninjas were not allowed to step into the daimyo palace without an escort from the daimyo's ninja guards? Who cared if they had to report their presence in the capital to a special secret samurai guardsman? Konoha was not revolting anytime soon. Plus, missions in the capital were almost as rare as SS-rank ninjas, so these restrictions had basically no effect on the village at all. Still, it was very time-consuming and tiring to have talks with nobles, even if they were about unimportant things that would simply reassure daimyo about their loyalty. Hiruzen thought that was the end of the Land of Snow fiasco, but he was clearly wrong. After the daimyo of the Land of Snow won against the rebels, which didn't take even a day, an impressive feat in Hiruzen's opinion, KaiOshin simply gave up 2 days later. Well, nobody could blame them, really. The really important people of the village were killed in the revolt, and what was left was not strong enough to even be called a village. They should be happy the daimyo didn't outright disband the village for how weak it was. And therein laid the current problem. The letter, which was still tightly clutched in Danzo's angry grip, just as he started speaking. Yes, I have never sent my ninjas so far north, and nobody trained by me would act like an idiot, announcing where they come from. That doesn't matter. Hiruzen gritted out. Danzo was pushed too far too suddenly, and Hiruzen couldn't believe this made his friend blind to the real matter at hand. The most important thing is that Root's existence was revealed. This is an official complaint letter from the daimyo of the Land of Snow on behalf of KaiOshin for the actions of Konoha's secret Root division. Danzo suddenly grew pale, meaning the dignitaries of other countries will have free access to it. He muttered almost wordlessly, causing Hiruzen to stiffly nod. Root was an incredible concept, but it only worked if they were totally secret, even from the higher-ups of Konoha. Over the years, the organization did various things and caused mayhem in too many places. The only saving grace was nobody knew they belonged to Konoha. Oh, people suspected, but that was it. Suspicion was at the end of the day just suspicion. The second evidence starts coming about Root being Konoha's division, though. All the families of the victims of assassinations. Danzo could almost see the map of the elemental nations getting painted in the colors of Konoha enemies. After all, every eyewitness that caught even a glance of the blank white mask with the words Root on it now knew to blame Konoha for it. Kidnapping a member of the Yukimi clan from the village, and having over 100 eyewitnesses to the said red-haired female agent's introduction as somebody belonging to Root, Hiruzen continued, it honestly would not matter, and we could just dismiss it as lies. The daimyo of the Land of Snow would have no leverage, if only the Bairi company didn't join the fray and confirm his claims to be truthful. The same Bairi company that holds incredibly high relations with many daimyos, important nobles, and wealthy merchants. The same Bairi company that is one of the richest in the world. The same Bairi company. That was totally impartial and has the best reputation there is. The same Bairi company we desperately need if we want to recover after the QB attack in a reasonable time frame. Danzo finished it for Hiruzen. This was the main problem. The daimyo of the Land of Snow somehow managed to convince the Bairi company to support his claims. Frankly, Hiruzen didn't think this was hard. It was a well-known fact that Bairi and Snow Corporation never clashed, and their relationship was very cordial. The men stared at each other silently before Hiruzen decided to act like a Hokage for a moment. I want you to disband Root. This time for real, Danzo. He started in a commanding tone. I let it go on for far too long. Its presence became detrimental for the village. A week later, an emissary of the Bairi company will arrive in Konoha in order to negotiate the reparations for the acts of Root in their lands. We both know it doesn't matter if it was your ninja or not, or even if the accusation is actually real. There is simply too much political power being thrown around and too little time to prove ourselves innocent. Hiruzen sadly shook his head, ending his speech. Konoha needed the goods of the Bairi company, and the Fire Daimyo was far too friendly to their representative in the capital of the Land of Fire to ignore the company. The best Hiruzen could do was to go headfirst into this already lost negotiation with their emissary and try to reduce any sort of payment they would ask for, while keeping their relationship on a good basis. Hearing Hiruzen's order, Danzo just turned on his heel and silently left the office, silently swearing to find out who played him for a fool. Without the support of so many daimyo, Konoha could just throw around its weight and past achievement, but now, damn it all to hell. So many years of my effort wasted in a blink of an eye. The second Danzo closed the door behind himself. A man appeared from the shadow of Hokage's chair. Will he really do it? Disband the Root. Hiruzen could only exasperatedly yet tiredly shake his head. If only Reidokun, if only.